Hi there! My name is Hannah, and today I'll be making wacky cake. Cake is a delicious, sweet dessert typically made from the combination of flour, eggs, sugar, and butter or other shortening. While I'm sure you've eaten cake before, you may not know just how delicate a cake structure is and how critical the mixing steps are to achieve its desired fluffy texture. You may also be thinking, what makes cake batter different from bread dough anyways? Well, stay tuned because I would love to show you. Here are the ingredients you will need for your cake. 1½ cup of flour, 1½ cups of sugar, 3 tablespoons cocoa, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1 teaspoon of vinegar, 5 tablespoons of melted butter, and 1 cup of warm water. Now here are the ingredients you will need to make the icing for the topping. 2 cups of powdered sugar, 1/4 cup of butter, and enough milk to moisten. I ended up using 5 tablespoons of milk. Now on to the baking process. First, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You will need an 8x8 pan, but it is not necessary to grease it. We will be mixing all of the ingredients directly into the pan. Now we're going to sift together our dry ingredients. Be aware that sifting and mixing are 2 different techniques. Sifting requires the ingredients to pass through a fine strainer to break up any lumps and aerate the mixture. It is recommended that you sift your dry ingredients when making cake to help combine them all evenly before they are mixed with your wet ingredients. The aeration that occurs also helps provide a lightness to your ingredients, which will help prevent your cake's texture from being too dense. In this bowl, I have combined 1½ cups of flour, 1 cup of sugar, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 3 tablespoons of cocoa, 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And now I will pass it through my strainer a few times to properly sift them together. Next, make 3 holes in the dry ingredients. In a separate bowl, combine 5 tablespoons of melted butter, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, 1 teaspoon of vinegar, and then mix them together. Then add the wet ingredients into each of the 3 holes you made in the dry ingredients. Pour 1 cup of warm water over all of the ingredients in the pan and stir until the mixture is homogeneous. A homogeneous mixture is a mixture in which its entire composition is uniform so that the same proportions of its ingredients are distributed evenly throughout. Once your oven is preheated to 350 degrees, it is now time to bake your cake for 30 to 35 minutes on top of a cookie sheet. Meanwhile, we can make our icing. Mix together 2 cups of powdered sugar and 1/4 cup of butter into a fine mixture. Add milk 1 tablespoon at a time to make a smooth icing. I ended up using 5 tablespoons of milk. Now with the icing prepared, we can top it on the cake once it's cooled. You don't want to put the icing on before the cake is cooled because the heat will melt the icing and become a runny mess. The cake is now done baking, but while we let it cool, I'm sure you're still wondering, what makes cake batter different from bread dough? Doughs and batters are both classified as mixtures of flour and water, but the proportions are where we see the distinction. Doughs are semi-solid and typically contain more flour than water, whereas batters have a fluid structure and contain 2 to 5 times more water than doughs. In doughs, the water binds to the gluten proteins and starch granules to create a stiff network that can be manipulated by hand. This is why in breads, you are able to knead the dough without the substance breaking apart or running. In batters, however, the gluten proteins and starch granules are dispersed in the higher amounts of liquid and create a much looser network that is runny and can be poured rather than kneaded. Doughs and batters are similar in the sense that their structures are both temporary. When they are cooked, a chemical reaction takes place where the starch granules absorb the water, swell, and then reconstruct into a permanent solid structure. While baking, the gluten proteins also provide the structure needed to prevent the cake from becoming too crumbly. However, if your gluten network is overdeveloped, then your cake will come out very chewy and elastic, so make sure you don't overmix your batter. While this new structure is solid, the starch and gluten network is still filled with millions of tiny air pockets, which give cakes and bread their spongy texture. In terms of the cake we have made today, the sifting and mixing processes have played a major role in aerating the mixture to allow for these air pockets to form. The payoff here is a moist, fluffy, and light cake texture. Now that the cake has cooled, decorate your wacky cake with your sugar icing and any other fun additions of your choosing.
Let me just clean up the
I chose some of my favorite candies, sugar googly eyes, gummy cherries, and Sour Patch watermelons. Have fun with it. And thank you for tuning in today. I hope you enjoy.